Hello and welcome, Exiles, to the first time I have hit dot cap on Righteous Fire with just Righteous Fire. Previously, I did it on Gagarf, but that was Righteous Fire plus Val Righteous Fire. Essentially, my regular Righteous Fire was dealing like 10 to 20 million, and then Valve Righteous Fire was another 15 to 25 million on top of that, which made us clear dot cap. For those of you wondering, dot cap is a 36 million, well, it's 35 million and 791k damage per second. And the reason that is because of 32-bit signed integer. Basically, the dot cap is measured in damage per minute. So you get 200 or 2 to the 31st power divided by 60 minus 1 or something like that is roughly where you get the number for dot cap, because the way the game is coded, that is how damage over time is stored, and thus that is your official cap for how much damage you can deal to a target with a damage over time skill. You can get much more than that on hit-based skills, and part of the limitation for the very, very high end of builds is why, at the end of the day, super high-end stuff ends up being hit-based, and quite frankly, it's hard to scale dot builds that high anyways. Now, let's get into this a little bit more specifically of how we hit the dot cap and talk about this variation of the build. Now, you'll notice right now I am wearing 2 scepters. Now, this is a much squishier version of the build because I realized that the tank I was setting up the character for was basically designing it for Voided Valdo Tormented Fear, which is way overkill for Ubers and everything else in the game. Way more tank than you really realistically need. And so I figured I would showcase a little bit different variation on the build in case you just want to push some DPS and push more normal content. Because right now, the Valdo map supply doesn't really exist. So if you wanted to chain Voided maps, you just can't. They don't really exist on trade. So I figured I would showcase this version of the build just to give you an idea. If you want to push damage up to the absolute limit, this is how you do it. Essentially, I opted for dual scepter, and the reason for that is so I could leap slam. You could go dual wand like the wands we had before, but I opted for dual wielding scepters, and I chose the Karui base because it has a higher attack speed, so that way our leap slam feels pretty decent in terms of how fast we can go over objects, etc. You can opt for just dual wands and then run like phase run, and that is completely fine. You'll walk around faster, but then you won't be able to leap over as many obstacles, and then, you know, there's pros and cons to each. I chose dual scepters. You could do dual wands if you want to. But the idea is with 2 weapons, we get a bunch of int and a bunch of mana because it's easy to target a double fracture. It's basically you make it a 2 explicit item, and then you increase mana to about 1,000. You increase attribute to about 5,000. You do a scarcer for physical by about 1,500 to target the Fizz Leech mana mod. And then you make everything else in the item scarcer by about 500%. And that's like, I don't know, 40% success rate on scepters. On wands, it's maybe an 80% success rate. And then you awaken an orb, a 100% spell damage with burning damage from Warlord. That gives you the 90% plus 1% per 16, which is a lot of percent damage on our character. That's well over 300% damage between those 2 mods. And then you simply do a Reforged Fire or a Veiled Orb to get yourself a suffix, and then Benchcraft Fire.multi as your finishing affix. So that's how we crafted these scepters. And the idea here is we push a lot more damage going dual wield, and then we go back to Ivory Tower where we can put on Malevolence, as well as put on Keep Aspect of the Spider and put on Zealotry. Basically, I am going the route where we lose a bunch of tank and we add in a bunch of damage through auras like Malevolence, Zealotry. Obviously, with Malevolence, you get back the dot multi Watcher's Eye mod. You can add back in Clarity for the gain as ES. We end up gaining ES on the Sublime Vision version of the build. With this setup, I had about 46k ES. Now I have 53, and this can change a little bit depending on where you put your nodes. I opted for these dot multi nodes to help us hit dot cap. Without these nodes, we were at like 34 million. We were just below, so I swapped a few nodes around to grab these dot multi nodes, and then that helped us hit the cap. Now, looking at dot cap and looking at the character as an overall, this is one of the few times I'll go in PUB. Generally, I try to avoid PUB outside of just outlining my trees. But then sometimes I'm just curious what the numbers are of my finalized build after I've spent a lot of time min-maxing. This is one of the few times where I'll go through and configure it. And the configurations is 20 Warcry power, because when you're next to a unique enemy, you get 20 Warcry power. That gives you about a 12% covered in ash mod. We have 4 stacks of Spider's Web, because Aspect of the Spider goes up to 4 stacks. We have Infusion, that's just us channeling our skill. So whenever we shoot the beam out, you can see we get the Infusion buff right over here. That's about 10% more fire damage. And then we are always on low life, and I think that's pretty much the whole configuration. I guess we technically checked Guardian Pinnacle. Obviously, if you check regular boss, the number will change. If you check, for example, no boss at all, the number will go up. And then if you check Ubers, the number will go down because Ubers have a 70% less damage modifier. So you'll see in total, our Uber DPS is 12 million. And this is where you get the differentiation between dot cap and Uber dot cap. One of the few scenarios where you can push past the dot cap is by dealing up to 100 million damage. It's like 100 and, I don't know, you need to deal like 105 or something like that, roughly, in terms of the, and then the Uber boss will reduce the damage by 70%. So there's dot cap, which is most bosses at 35.79, and then Uber dot cap, which is like 100 and, I don't know, 8 million or something like that, to basically be 70% less of to hit basically this 35.791 number again. And then there's other scenarios like Delirious where enemies have damage reduction, stuff like that, where your damage can be over the cap, but you can still have full effect of it because they're reducing your damage, yada, yada, yada. Anyways, I did this just to showcase that we could hit dot cap on the baseline of Righteous Fire, which I think is just a cool thing. Ultimately, one of my goals for this build was to hit dot cap, and I will specify that it wasn't the way I would have liked to. I would have liked to hit dot cap with the Sublime Vision Purity of Fire version, but quite frankly, it's not really feasible. This purity of Sublime Vision, that setup where we take out all that damage conversion, we lose Power and auras because we can't go Malevolence, we can't go Zealotry, we lose the low life tick, and we lose the second weapon. So ultimately, that damage will be somewhere more in the range of 10 to 15 million instead of like 50 million or 10 to 20 million, depending on if you have Val Righteous Fire, etc. And so that's the bit of the variation or difference there. Anyways, this is the setup I would go essentially if I just wanted to map, do normal content, because quite frankly, it's still really pretty tanky. There's something about having 50k ES that just lets you ignore most mechanics, especially if you have 50k ES, and then on top of that, you have a good amount of regen. For example, we have roughly 9k regen, which our net regen on that is probably around 6,000 or 7,000 based on our 34k mana pool in terms of what degen we have. But it ends up working out pretty well to still have a decent amount of survivability. And this is just one of those scenarios where the survivability of the Sublime Vision Purifier, it's just overkill in specific need to do Voided Valve map. So I want to stress that. So if you're playing the build, based on what I've figured out, I believe the dual wield setup is the way to go if you want to go for a single target and you just want to do regular mapping. I think it's a good way to go. If you want to be basically a dot cap for a Righteous Fire build, that's how you do it. So that's why I wanted to showcase this version. Ultimately, I am going to still play with the Sublime Vision Purity of Fire version because I want to do voided maps. But I figured I would showcase this for the people that aren't interested in doing voided maps. They don't want to risk their character, and they still want to deal a lot of damage and have fun just running around blowing things up, and this is how you do it. I will also say, you can also run a shield if you just really prefer shield charge, but you'll lose a decent amount of damage doing it. You'll gain a bit of ES, you'll gain a bit of tank, but you will lose ES doing it. Shield gives roughly around, it's a decent amount less DPS because this weapon here is giving us over 300% damage and 20 dot multi, and it gives us a good amount of mana. So it's not even like that much less ES because it gives 150 mana and you can only roll like 70 or 80 mana on a shield. You will get another 300 flat ES, which will make the ES number go up, but it won't improve your DPS much. That's all I want to stress right now. Is just a little bit of a difference between double weapon versus shield. Is basically just you're doing it for shield charge versus you're doing it for the damage of having dual wield weapon, and I want to give you that option. I'm gonna Val Righteous Fire here just because he is a Uber boss, which means he can take more damage. Normally, Val Righteous Fire is completely superfluous in terms of it doesn't matter if you click it or not, because most content, you're going to be at dot cap, and the Val Righteous Fire is giving you no additional damage. It does give you a little bit more radius, like a little bit more AoE, where you can kill enemies a little bit farther away from you. But ultimately, outside of Ubers, the Val Righteous Fire is not going to matter. That being said, if you are on a lower budget version of the build, right now we're on 50 million DPS with Val Righteous Fire. Say you're on 20 million DPS with your normal Righteous Fire with a lot lower investment in gear, then popping that Val Righteous Fire is going to maybe get you to dot cap normally, even if you're on a lot lower budget. I also want to stress, After doing multiple weapon crafts, I realized it's just really pretty easy. And the one thing I've learned from this is I would probably end up recommending doing this version of going dual wield if you're doing the budget setup instead of a shield, because it is just a bunch more damage and you don't really lose too much in terms of ES or in terms of tank to do it. I guess you lose some level of max res and stuff like that, but I think it's pretty handily worth it considering how much damage you get from going dual wield weapons. So I just want to give that option, and I just wanted to showcase that if you really want to push damage, you don't necessarily care about being omega tanky, or Sublime Vision is just out of your budget, this is the sort of thing I'd recommend going for, because it's just pretty freaking cool to play an RF build and be able to benefit from that level of damage scaling and be able to do Ubers or harder bosses and just see their HP just melt down. I will say this overall from my experience playing this build versus Gagarf, my two highest invested, best Righteous Fire characters I've ever made. The one thought process I have out of this is that this character I believe is stronger in the current league, but in Standard and Legacy League, if you are a Standard enjoyer, I do believe that the Gagarf will be stronger. When you consider Legacy Shaper's Touch and some of the Legacy gear available, I think it scales harder than the mana gear, but I'm not 100% sure. There might be some really good mana gear in Standard. That I'm not 100% sure. But I think in League, this is probably the best Righteous Fire you can do with this int mod. But that's just a rough guess based on playing both builds. That's for the people that are playing in Standard. I know they like, there's some people in Standard that really like Righteous Fire and like to go high investment. I just want to stress that I think the Gagarf version of the build does scale higher. Not 100% sure. You can do your own research, but I figured I'd include that tidbit there for those curious. Anyways, this will probably be the second to last video I'm going to make on this character. Ultimately, what is remaining for me to do is a lot of very high investment, and I think I might stall on my next video, my final video for this character, because it's going to require some more currency that I don't have right now, and I'd rather just farm that currency while playing some more variety of builds and make some more cool builds for the people watching this channel. The next option for things I want to showcase is, one, I want to showcase an Archmage variation of this character using this mana per int mod, because I believe it could be one of the strongest builds in the league. I believe it could be a similar level of tank while also taking the damage to a moon, making it a hit-based character with Archmage. And I want to showcase that just in terms of people who just care about pure power. And then also the next other idea I want to do is I kind of want to try a bleed earthquake character. It's so easy to make very strong fizz weapons in this league. There's never been a better league to make an attack-based bleed character or fizz-based character because of how good of rare weapons you can make thanks to the graveyard. And I think this is a unique opportunity where we can make a pretty strong character for a reasonable cost just because of how easy it is to craft those endgame items for a bleed build. So that's what I'm probably gonna look at doing next. Those are the two ideas for projects I have. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the journey of the Mana Man RF. If you look at my character, you look it up on POB, I'm probably gonna swap it back to Sublime Vision Purity, so that way I can still run some voided maps to make some profit, to start building up currency for the last few upgrades I need to do on this character. Hopefully I do not void on it, but that is always a possibility. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out.